Imagine waking up one morning and realizing that everything you despise about other people, their selfishness, their cruelty, their weakness, exists somewhere deep within your own soul. The arrogance you can't stand in your coworker, it's there. The manipulation you hate in your ex-partner, you've done it too. The cowardice you mock in others, you feel it every time you avoid a difficult conversation. This isn't just uncomfortable self-awareness. This is the beginning of the most profound psychological discovery in human history. One that a brilliant Swiss psychiatrist named Jung spent his entire life exploring. He called it shadow work, and it reveals something so disturbing about human nature that most people will do anything to avoid confronting it. You see, there was a man who dedicated his life to understanding the darkest corners of the human psyche. He didn't just study madness from the outside, he dove headfirst into his own psychological abyss, confronted his demons, and emerged with insights that would revolutionize how we understand consciousness itself. Carl Gustav Jung figured out something that changes everything once you truly grasp it. You are not who you think you are. But here's where it gets terrifying. Jung discovered that the very traits we judge most harshly in others are precise reflections of the parts of ourselves we've buried so deep we've forgotten they exist. The liar you can't stand. You lie to, just in more subtle ways. The narcissist who makes your skin crawl. There's a part of you that craves that same attention and admiration. The victim who always complains. You play that role more often than you'd like to admit. This isn't some feel-good psychology or new age nonsense. This is based on decades of clinical observation, thousands of hours of therapy sessions, and Jung's own terrifying journey into what he called the land of the dead, his personal encounter with the unconscious mind that nearly destroyed him, but ultimately revealed the secret architecture of human personality. Think about the last time you felt intense irritation or disgust toward someone. Can you remember their face, the way they spoke, the behavior that made your blood boil? Now here's the question that will haunt you. What if that person was showing you exactly the part of yourself you're most desperate to deny? Jung called this phenomenon projection, the unconscious process by which we cast our own disowned traits onto others and then react with emotional intensity. But it goes deeper than simple psychological defense mechanisms. What Jung discovered was that this shadow, this collection of everything we refuse to acknowledge about ourselves, just disappear when we ignore it. It grows stronger. It influences our relationships, sabotages our goals, and creates the very patterns of suffering we blame on external circumstances. The man who figured life out realized something that most people never will. The external world is a mirror reflecting our internal landscape back to us. The chaos you see in society, it exists within you. The love you recognize in others, that's yours too. The evil you fear in the world, you carry that potential as well. But here's what makes this discovery revolutionary rather than just depressing. Once you stop running from your shadow and start integrating it, everything changes. Your relationships become more authentic. Your creative potential explodes. Your capacity for genuine compassion, the performative kind, but real empathy, expands exponentially. You become whole. Jung didn't just theorize about this process. He lived it. He faced his own shadow so completely that he could help others do the same. He became the man who figured life out not by becoming perfect, but by becoming integrated, by acknowledging and accepting the full spectrum of his humanity. The question isn't whether you have a shadow. You do. The question is whether you're brave enough to meet it. So before we go deeper into this rabbit hole of self-discovery, take a moment to subscribe to this channel and hit that like button, because what you're about to learn will challenge everything you believe about yourself and the nature of reality itself. This isn't just another psychology video. This is an invitation to meet the person you've been hiding from your entire life. Are you ready to discover who you really are when all the masks come off? The reason most people never figure out life isn't because they're stupid or lazy. It's because they're trapped in what Jung called the fundamental lie of civilization. The belief that we can become whole by cutting away the parts of ourselves we don't like. We've been conditioned since childhood to present only our acceptable qualities while burying everything else in what Jung termed the personal shadow. But here's where Jung's genius becomes apparent. He understood that this psychological amputation doesn't eliminate our unwanted traits, it makes them more powerful. When we refuse to acknowledge our capacity for cruelty, that cruelty doesn't disappear. It goes underground, where it operates outside our conscious control, sabotaging our relationships and creating the very chaos we claim to despise. Think about it this way: every saint has the potential for evil, and every sinner carries the seed of redemption. Jung discovered this through his own psychological breakdown between 1913 and 1917, when he voluntarily descended into what he called his confrontation with the unconscious. During this period, he experienced visions, heard voices, and came face to face with aspects of his personality that terrified him. Most people would have considered this a mental breakdown. Jung called it his most important work. Friedrich Nietzsche understood this dynamic when he wrote, "He who fights monsters should be careful lest he thereby become a monster." But Jung took this insight further. He realized that we don't become monsters by fighting them, we become monsters by refusing to acknowledge that we already carry that monstrous potential within us. The person who insists they could never be capable of violence is often one traumatic event away from proving themselves wrong. This is why Jung was so fascinated by the phenomenon of possession, not supernatural possession, but psychological possession by our own disowned aspects. When someone explodes in rage and later says, "That wasn't like me," they're telling the truth. It wasn't like their conscious self. It was their shadow taking control. Arthur Schopenhauer glimpsed this truth when he observed that a man can do what he wants, but not want what he wants. Our desires, our compulsions, our automatic reactions, they emerge from the depths of a psyche we barely understand. Jung spent his life mapping this inner territory, and what he found was both terrifying and liberating. The shadow isn't just individual, it's collective. Jung observed how entire societies could become possessed by their collective shadow, projecting their disowned darkness onto other groups, other nations, other races. The Holocaust, the genocides, the wars, they're not aberrations committed by monsters. They're the inevitable result of collective shadow. Projection taken to its logical extreme. But here's what makes Jung's approach revolutionary. Instead of trying to eliminate the shadow, he proposed integrating it. He understood that the energy we spend repressing our darkness could be transformed into creative power, authentic relationships, and genuine wisdom. The person who acknowledges their capacity for cruelty becomes genuinely compassionate, not because they're trying to be good, but because they understand the weight of their choices. Viktor Frankl observed something similar in the concentration camps. The people who maintained their humanity weren't those who claimed to be naturally good, but those who recognized their capacity for evil and chose differently every single day. They knew that the line between good and evil runs through every human heart. and they consciously chose which side to feed. This is why Jung called the integration of the shadow the first and most important stage of psychological development. You cannot become whole while denying half of who you are. You cannot achieve authentic relationships while projecting your disowned aspects onto others. And you cannot find lasting peace while at war with yourself. The man who figured life out realized that self-knowledge isn't about discovering how wonderful you are, it's about discovering how complex, contradictory, and potentially dangerous you are, and learning to work with that reality rather than against it. It's about becoming conscious of your unconscious, so that your unconscious doesn't run your life. But here's where the story gets even more disturbing, because once you begin to see your own shadow clearly, you start to see it everywhere else, too. And that's when you realize that the world isn't divided into good people and bad people. It's populated by people who are aware of their darkness and people who aren't. And those who aren't aware are the most dangerous of all. The most terrifying thing about living unconsciously isn't what you might do, it's what you're already doing without realizing it. Right now, as you listen to this, your shadow is operating in the background of your life, making decisions, influencing your relationships, and creating patterns of suffering that you blame on everything except yourself. Consider your last 3 failed relationships. What did they all have in common? You probably blamed your partners for being selfish, manipulative, or emotionally unavailable. But Jung would ask a different question. What aspect of yourself were you projecting onto each of them? What disowned part of your psyche were they reflecting back to you? This is how the shadow operates, through unconscious repetition, compulsion. You keep attracting the same type of person because they carry the projection of your disowned traits. The narcissist, you can't stop dating. They're showing you your own hunger for admiration that you've never acknowledged. The emotionally distant partner you keep choosing, they're mirroring your own fear of genuine intimacy. But it goes deeper than romantic relationships. Your shadow shapes every aspect of your existence through what psychologists call confirmation bias and selective attention. You unconsciously seek out evidence that confirms your projections while ignoring anything that contradicts them. The colleague you've decided is incompetent. You notice every mistake they make while overlooking their successes. The friend you've labeled as selfish, every interaction gets filtered through that lens. Jung discovered that this isn't just individual pathology, the foundation of all human conflict. Nations go to war not because they're fundamentally different, but because they project their collective shadows onto each other. The evil empire is always the other guy. The terrorists, the extremists, the fanatics, they're always them, never us. Meanwhile, we remain unconscious of our own capacity for the very behaviors we condemn. This creates what Jung called the inflation of the ego, the false belief that we are only our conscious, socially acceptable selves. We become convinced of our own righteousness while remaining blind to our unconscious motivations. The activist who fights against oppression while being tyrannical to their family. The spiritual teacher who preaches love while harboring deep resentment. The therapist who helps others heal while avoiding their own trauma. The shadow doesn't just influence who we choose to be around, determines who we become. Every time you refuse to acknowledge a difficult emotion, that emotion goes into the shadow where it gains power over you. The anger you won't admit to feeling becomes passive aggression. The sadness you won't allow yourself to experience becomes depression. The fear you refuse to face becomes anxiety. This is why Jung said that everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves. The intensity of your emotional reactions is directly proportional to how much you're projecting. The person who triggers you most strongly is showing you exactly what you refuse to see about yourself. But here's where the consequences become truly devastating. Your shadow doesn't just affect you, it gets passed down through generations. The trauma you won't process becomes your children's inheritance. The patterns you won't break become their normal. The emotions you won't feel become their burden to carry. Psychologists now understand that family systems unconsciously organize around the disowned aspects of previous generations. The grandfather who never dealt with his rage creates a family dynamic where anger is forbidden, leading to children who either explode inappropriately or shut down completely. The grandmother who never acknowledged her neediness creates descendants who swing between desperate attachment and emotional unavailability. This transgenerational transmission of shadow material explains why certain family patterns persist for decades or even centuries. It's not genetic, it's psychological inheritance. The sins of the fathers are literally visited upon the children, not through divine punishment, but through unconscious psychological transmission. Jung realized that breaking these cycles requires conscious suffering, the willingness to feel and integrate the emotions that previous generations avoided. This is why he called individuation the most difficult task, not because it requires special talent, but because it demands that you feel everything you've been trained to avoid. The man who figured life out understood that most human suffering isn't caused by external circumstances, it's caused by our unconscious reactions to those circumstances. We don't see the world as it is. We see it through the lens of our projections. We don't respond to what's actually happening. We react to what we imagine is happening based on our unconscious expectations and fears. But what if there was a way to escape this prison of unconscious projection? What if you could actually see reality clearly instead of through the distorted lens of your shadow? The man who figured life out discovered something that goes against everything we've been taught about personal development. The path to freedom isn't about becoming a better person, it's about becoming a more complete person. Jung's revolutionary insight was that you don't overcome your shadow by fighting it. You integrate it by acknowledging it exists. This integration process begins with a radical shift in perspective that Jung called active imagination. Instead of trying to eliminate your negative traits, you start having conversations with them. You literally dialogue with the parts of yourself you've disowned. The angry part, the selfish part, the cowardly part. They all have something to tell you about what you need but haven't been getting. Jung's own breakthrough came when he stopped trying to be the perfect psychiatrist and started listening to his inner voices without judgment. During his psychological crisis, he would sit with a notebook and write down whatever came up from his unconscious, no matter how disturbing or bizarre. He drew pictures of his visions, recorded his dreams, and treated his shadow aspects like honored guests rather than unwanted intruders. This is the opposite of what most therapeutic approaches suggest. Instead of positive thinking, Jung advocated for honest thinking. Instead of affirmations, he recommended acknowledging your negative emotions fully. Instead of trying to love yourself, he suggested learning to accept yourself, including the parts you don't like. The rebellion against unconscious living requires what Jung called holding the tension of opposites. This means simultaneously acknowledging that you're capable of both great love and terrible cruelty, profound wisdom and embarrassing stupidity, genuine generosity and shocking selfishness. Most people can't tolerate this psychological tension, so they split off one side and project it onto others. But Jung discovered that if you can hold this tension without collapsing into either extreme, something miraculous happens. A third option emerges. He called this the transcendent function, a creative solution that transcends the original duality. You become capable of authentic compassion because you know your own capacity for cruelty. You develop genuine confidence because you've accepted your limitations. The most counterintuitive part of Jung's approach is that shadow integration actually makes you more moral, not less. When you acknowledge your capacity for dishonesty, you become more committed to truth. When you admit your potential for violence, you become more dedicated to peace. The person who claims they could never hurt anyone is often the one who does the most damage through unconscious aggression. Historical examples prove this principle. The most effective leaders weren't those who claimed moral purity, they were those who understood their own darkness and chose to channel it constructively. Winston Churchill's depression gave him the psychological depth to understand evil. Abraham Lincoln's melancholy made him capable of the fierce compassion required to end slavery. Gandhi's acknowledgement of his own capacity for violence made him a genuine advocate for non-violence. This integration process requires what Jung called conscious suffering, the willingness to feel the emotions you've been avoiding your entire life, the grief you never processed, the rage you never expressed, the fear you never acknowledged. They're all waiting in your shadow, and they all need to be felt before they can be integrated. But here's the revolutionary part. Once you stop running from your shadow and start welcoming it home, your energy multiplies exponentially. All the psychological energy you were using to suppress your unwanted aspects becomes available for creative expression, authentic relationships, and genuine contribution to the world. The man who figured life out realized that wholeness isn't about perfection, it's about integration. It's not about eliminating your darkness, it's about making it conscious, so it can serve you instead of sabotaging you. And this brings us to the final, most profound realization that changed Jung's understanding of what it means to be human. The man who figured life out discovered something so profound that it redefines the very nature of consciousness itself. The goal of life isn't to become perfect, it's to become whole. And wholeness includes everything you've been taught to reject about yourself. Jung's ultimate realization came through what he called the individuation process, the psychological journey toward becoming who you actually are, rather than who you think you should be. But here's the twist that changes everything. Who you actually are includes not just your conscious personality, but also your shadow, your unlived potential, and even the collective patterns of humanity itself. This led Jung to perhaps his most revolutionary insight. The individual psyche isn't separate from the collective. Unconscious sits a unique expression of it. Every person carries within them the entire spectrum of human possibility. The saint and the sinner, the hero and the coward, the creator and the destroyer. We are not divided into good people and bad people. We are all people carrying the full range of human potential. But here's where Jung's discovery becomes truly transformative. When you fully integrate your shadow, something extraordinary happens. You stop being at the mercy of unconscious forces and start having conscious choice over which aspects of your nature to express. The person who acknowledges their capacity for cruelty gains the power to choose compassion. The individual who accepts their potential for cowardice develops genuine courage. This is what Jung meant when he said, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. Not who your parents wanted you to be, not who society expects you to be, but the complete, integrated human being that includes all of your potentials, both light and dark. The final paradox, Jung discovered, is that the very traits we judge most harshly in others often contain our greatest unrealized gifts. The selfishness you despise might be teaching you about healthy boundaries. The aggression you hate might be showing you the assertiveness you need to develop. The manipulation you can't stand might be revealing your own need to learn influence and persuasion. This realization transforms everything. Suddenly, every person who triggers you becomes a teacher. Every difficult emotion becomes a messenger. Every character flaw becomes a doorway to greater self-understanding. The external world stops being something that happens to you and becomes a mirror reflecting your internal landscape back to you. Jung lived this truth until his death at age 85, continuing to explore the depths of his own psyche and helping others do the same. He never claimed to have figured everything out, but he figured out the most important thing. The path to freedom runs directly through the center of everything you've been trying to avoid. The man who figured life out understood that consciousness isn't about thinking positive thoughts or maintaining a perfect self-image. True consciousness is the willingness to see yourself clearly, including the parts you don't like, and to integrate all of it into a coherent, authentic whole. So here's the question that will determine the trajectory of the rest of your life. Are you ready to stop running from yourself? Are you prepared to meet the person you've been hiding from? Not to judge them, but to integrate them. Can you handle the truth that you are far more complex, contradictory, and powerful than you ever imagined? Because once you answer yes to these questions, everything changes. Your relationships become more real. Your work becomes more meaningful. Your capacity for both love and wisdom expands exponentially. You become dangerous in the best possible way, dangerous to the systems and patterns that keep people unconscious, including the ones operating in your own life. The man who figured life out left us a roadmap. The question is, do you have the courage to follow it? If this video has challenged your understanding of yourself and reality, leave a comment below sharing one shadow aspect you're willing to acknowledge. And don't forget to share this with someone who needs to hear it, because the world needs more people willing to become whole. The journey to wholeness begins with a single step: the willingness to see yourself clearly. Are you ready to take it?